Arena in Indianapolis, is a landmark event that sits right at the junction of two eras. It is notable for being the first WWF pay-per-view in which the reigning world champion, Shawn Michaels, did not have a match on the card, and it is remembered by historians for its high-concept main event and significant technical production issues. Event overview. The event is defined by the first-ever Buried Alive match, which served as the climax of the long-running Undertaker vs. Mankind rivalry. Behind the scenes, the show was marked by a bizarre heel-turn angle for Jim Ross, who experienced genuine microphone/headset malfunctions during the broadcast, issues the WWF played into as part of his character's frustration with Vince McMahon. Key matches and reception. The Undertaker vs. Mankind Buried Alive match. This is the undisputed centerpiece of the show. While the wrestling itself was secondary to the cinematic, gimmick-heavy nature of the match, it is viewed as a pivotal moment in character-driven storytelling. The visual of The Undertaker's hand emerging from the grave at the end of the broadcast remains one of the most iconic images of 1996. Stone Cold Steve Austin vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley. This match is often cited by modern fans as a must-watch curiosity. It features the two future pillars of the Attitude Era squaring off before their characters were fully realized. Austin, now using his iconic, glass-shattering entrance theme, was already receiving massive crowd support, and the match is viewed as a high-quality competitive preview of what would become the company's main event scene. Psycho Sid vs. Vader, #1 contender match. A heavyweight clash to determine the challenger for the WWF Championship at Survivor Series. It was a brutal, power-heavy bout that ultimately leaned into the crowd's surprising, intense support for Sid. It's remembered more for the big man spectacle than technical refinement. Marc Mero C. vs. Goldust, Intercontinental Championship. A highly regarded mid-card match that is often cited as proof of Marc Mero's underrated ability during this period. It provided a technical anchor for the show and is frequently praised as one of the more consistent matches of the evening. Owen Hart and the British Bulldog C. vs. the Smoking Guns, Tag Team Championship. A significant match for the tag division, marking the end of the Smoking Guns as a team and the ongoing internal strife within Camp Cornette. It was a functional, solid tag team match that moved the division's narrative forward. Final thoughts. Retrospective ratings for Buried Alive are generally split, usually hovering in the 0.5 to 6.5/10 range. It is widely seen as a necessary show, crucial for its narrative development and iconic main event visuals, even if the surrounding undercard felt like a holding pattern, while the company awaited the return of Bret Hart. Within your Combos and Kayfabe project, how do you categorize a show like this that lacks a world championship match? Does the focus on high-stakes stipulation matches, like the Buried Alive In Your House 12, It's Time, December 15, 1996, took place in West Palm Beach, Florida. It is historically significant for being the night Psycho Sid truly solidified his position as the top dog in the company, finally proving that the new generation experiment was shifting toward the darker, more intense tone that would eventually evolve into the Attitude Era. Event overview. Coming off the heels of a successful 1996, It's Time was a tight, focused show. Unlike the filler events that plagued the mid-90s, this card felt like it had a clear direction. Largely because it finally put the focus on the main event picture and the burgeoning rivalry between Bret Hart and the emerging stars of the roster. Key matches and reception. WWF Championship, Psycho Sid C. vs. Bret the Hitman Hart. This is the anchor of the show and widely considered a masterpiece of booking. Critics and fans often praise this match for its psychological depth. It was a perfect David versus Goliath dynamic, where the audience was genuinely torn between the technical perfection of Hart and the chaotic, charismatic intensity of Sid. The finish, which saw Shawn Michaels at ringside inadvertently cost Bret the match, is one of the most effective examples of three-way narrative building in wrestling history. The Undertaker vs. the Executioner, Armageddon Rules match, an oddity on the card. The Armageddon Rules stipulation, a hybrid of various match types, was confusing to many at the time, and is often criticized for being overly complicated. It served as a way to keep Taker busy while the title picture moved elsewhere, but it is rarely cited as a highlight of his career. Intercontinental Championship. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, C. vs. Marc Mero, a highly underrated match. Mero and Triple H had excellent chemistry, and this bout was instrumental in building Triple H's credibility as a main event level worker. It is often pointed to as a sign that the mid-card was finally starting to produce genuine star-making talent. The Godwins vs. Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, Tag Team Championship. A solid, if unremarkable, tag team bout that continued the internal drama within Camp Cornette. It successfully kept the belts on Hart and the Bulldog, who were the glue of the division at this time. Stone Cold Steve Austin vs. Goldust. A high-intensity match that was clearly designed to push Austin toward the main event. It was a physical, bitter struggle that perfectly encapsulated the meaner style of wrestling that was becoming the norm by the end of 1996. Final thoughts. Retrospectively, its time is often given a 6.5/10 to 7/10 rating. It is viewed as a highly successful conclusion to the 1996 calendar year. It successfully pivoted the company away from the new generation stalwarts and toward the new guard of Sid, Austin, and the evolving Triple H, while keeping Bret Hart as the undisputed center of the company's narrative gravity. For your combos and In Your House 13, Final Four, February 16, 1997, held at the UTC Arena in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is a pivotal event in WWF history. It is almost universally defined by its main event, a match that many historians view as one of the most intense, high-stakes brawls of the 1990s, and a major structural bridge to the emerging Attitude Era. Event Overview. The event was born out of crisis. After Shawn Michaels famously lost his smile and vacated the WWF Championship on Raw Thursday due to a legitimate knee injury, the company was forced to scrap the planned WrestleMania 13 main event. This resulted in the Final Four concept, a four-way elimination match to crown a new champion. Key matches and reception. WWF Championship. Bret Hart vs. Stone Cold. Steve Austin vs. The Undertaker vs. Vader. This is the undisputed highlight of the show. It was a chaotic, physical four-corners elimination match that utilized the ring space to its full potential. The interplay between the four men, all of whom were essentially fighting for their own survival, created a sense of desperation rarely seen in championship bouts at the time. Bret Hart eventually emerged victorious, though the story continued immediately the next night on Raw. WWF Intercontinental Championship, Rocky Maivia, C. vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, an essential watch for any student of wrestling history. Seeing a young Rocky Maivia, The Rock, and Triple H in their early iterations is fascinating. The match featured a clever finish involving Goldust, and the debut of a major character change. The emergence of Chyna, who debuted by attacking Marlena. It was a clear signal of the edgier direction the company was taking. WWF Tag Team Championship, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, C. vs. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon, a technically sound, albeit somewhat clinical, tag team match. It showcased the high-level in-ring ability of the challengers, though it is often remembered for its lackluster finish, a disqualification, which frustrated fans who wanted to see a definitive winner in such a high-caliber technical bout. The Nation of Domination vs. Bart Gunn, Goldust, and Flash Funk. A solid six-man tag match that served to highlight the growing faction-based warfare that would become a staple of the next few years. It was a fast-paced, high-energy affair that gave the mid-card talent a chance to shine. Final thoughts. Retrospective ratings for Final Four usually sit in the 5/10 to 6/10 range. Like several other In Your House events, it is essentially a one-match show. However, that one match, the Four Corners elimination, is so strong that it justifies the price of admission. It perfectly captured the transition from the polished professional style of the mid-90s to the grittier, brawl-heavy style that would define the upcoming boom period. In the context of your Combos and Kayfabe project, how do you... Revenge of the Taker, April 20th, 1997, is frequently cited by fans and historians as one of the most lopsided events in WWF history. Taking place in Rochester, New York, the card is widely considered to have a dreadful undercard, saved only by two high-quality matches at the very end of the night. Event Overview. The event is often looked back on as a holding pattern show. Coming off the momentum of WrestleMania 13, the company struggled to fill the card with compelling storylines. The show is infamous for its lack of depth, with many of the mid-card matches feeling like throwaway television bouts rather than pay-per-view attractions. Key matches and reception. Main event. Stone Cold Steve Austin vs. Bret the Hitman Hart. This was the anchor of the show, with the winner earning a future WWF Championship opportunity. While not reaching the legendary status of their WrestleMania 13 Submission Classic, it was still a very strong, intense match. It served to further the escalating Hart Foundation vs. Steve Austin feud, ending in a disqualification after the British Bulldog interfered. The post-match scene, where Austin gained the upper hand and put Bret in his own sharpshooter, is one of the most memorable moments of the evening. WWF Championship, The Undertaker, C vs. Mankind. This match is widely considered the highlight of the undercard. It was a brutal, physical affair that cemented the violent nature of their ongoing rivalry. It featured a legendary spot where The Undertaker used the steel ring steps to strike Mankind on the apron, leading to Mankind crashing through the Spanish announce table. It remains a must-watch for fans of this classic feud. WWF Tag Team Championship, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, C vs. the Legion of Doom. This opener is often criticized for its confusing finish and lack of crowd heat. Despite the talent involved, the match suffered from poor timing and a disqualification ending that left many fans frustrated, as it prevented a clean title change. Intercontinental Championship, Rocky Maivia, C vs Savio Vega. This match is almost universally panned. It was widely criticized for having little in-ring chemistry, and for showcasing a babyface Rocky Maivia that the crowd simply refused to get behind. Jesse Jams vs Rockabilly, often cited as the low point of the entire card. It featured two performers, Billy Gunn and Road Dogg, who were stuck in charisma vacuum gimmicks at the time, long before they would eventually find their footing as the New Age Outlaws. Final thoughts. Retrospective reviews for Revenge of the Taker typically land in the 4/10 to 5/10 range. It is a classic save the show with the main events card. The undercard is frequently described as dreadful or skippable, but the two closing matches are highly regarded by those who study the evolution of House 15. A Cold Day in Hell, May 11, 1997, from the Richmond Coliseum, is widely regarded as a solid, functional mid-level pay-per-view. It is best remembered as a transitional bridge show that featured the in-ring WWF debut of Ken Shamrock, and served as a vital building block for the rapidly intensifying Hart Foundation vs. Stone Cold Steve Austin feud. Event overview. The event is often described as a one-match show, regarding its historical impact, with the main event setting the stage for the chaotic summer of 1997. While the undercard was largely forgettable and suffered from filler booking, the show succeeded in its primary goal, advancing the core narratives that would eventually define the Attitude Era. Key matches and reception. WWF Championship, The Undertaker, C, vs. Stone Cold Steve Austin. The main event was a physically intense title fight. It is remembered more for the post-match angle than the wrestling itself. The Hart Foundation's interference, and the sight of Steve Austin fighting off the entire faction, using one of Bret Hart's own crutches, is one of the most iconic, tough guy moments of Austin's early main event run. Ken Shamrock vs. Vader, No Holds Barred. This is the hidden gem and critical standout of the night. It was an incredibly stiff, violent, and realistic-feeling brawl that showcased Shamrock's legitimacy as a threat. The two men reportedly agreed to lay their strikes in heavily, and it shows. It remains a favorite for fans who appreciate the shoot-style influenced wrestling that was starting to creep into the WWF. Mankind vs. Rocky Maivia. A significant historical footnote, as this was the final pay-per-view match for the Rocky Maivia persona before he began his transformation into the arrogant, charismatic villain that would become The Rock. The match itself was standard, but the finish, Mankind winning with the mandible claw, highlighted the struggles Rocky was facing with the crowd at the time. Ahmed Johnson vs. the Nation of Domination, Gauntlet match. A classic example of 1997 storytelling where the company leaned into the faction warfare that defined that year. While the wrestling was slow and at times clunky, the booking achieved its goal of keeping the heat on the Nation while making Ahmed look like a valiant, lone warrior. Hunter Hearst Helmsley vs. Flash Funk, an unremarkable mid-card bout. It is primarily noted by historians for the presence of China, who was beginning to steal the spotlight with her imposing presence, often garnering more fan attention than the wrestlers actually competing in the ring. Final thoughts. Retrospective ratings for A Cold Day in Hell typically land in the 5/10 to 6/10 range. It is rarely cited as a must-watch from start to finish, but for those studying the timeline of 1997, it is an essential viewing experience to witness the final days of the Rocky Maivia character and the hardening of the Austin vs. Hart Foundation rivalry. In the context of your Combos and Kayfabe project, how does this era of the WWF, where the undercard often felt like filler, while the main storylines were firing on all cylinders, compare to modern wrestling booking, which often tries to give every match on a card a significant narrative hook? Do you find the filler helps the main events feel bigger, or does it diminish them? Stampede, July 6, 1997, held at the Saddledome in Calgary, Alberta, is widely considered the absolute pinnacle of the In Your House series and one of the best pay-per-view events in WWF history. It is a legendary show that features one of the most electric, intense atmospheres ever captured on camera. Event overview. The brilliance of this show lies in its focus. With only 3 matches on the main card, plus a dark match, the WWF abandoned the filler booking that plagued previous events, allowing each contest to receive significant time and narrative weight. The show was built entirely around the heat between the pro-American Steve Austin and the pro-Canadian, anti-American Hart Foundation. Key matches and reception. The main event, the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart, Owen Hart, the British Bulldog, Jim Neidhart, and Brian Pillman, versus Stone Cold, Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock, Goldust, and the Legion of Doom. This 10-man tag match is near perfection. The heat, the storytelling, and the sheer adrenaline of the Calgary crowd cheering for the Harts while jeering Austin make this an essential, transcendent piece of wrestling history. It is often cited as the definitive faction versus faction match of the 90s, ending with the entire Hart family celebrating in the ring in a moment of pure organic emotional payoff. WWF Championship, The Undertaker, C vs. Vader, a massively underrated heavyweight war. Because the main event was so highly anticipated, many forget just how brutal and hard-hitting this title defense was. Vader put on a masterful performance, proving he could hang at the championship level, and the crowd, while focused on the main event, was fully invested in the physicality of this collision. The Great Sasuke vs. Taka Michinoku. This was the WWF's first significant foray into showcasing lucha libre and junior heavyweight style wrestling on a major stage. It blew the doors off the arena with its high-flying speed, technical precision, and innovative spots. It was a massive departure from the power and brawl style that dominated the rest of the show, earning universal acclaim from critics for its freshness and excitement. Mankind vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Dark Match. While often excluded from the official VHS DVD broadcast, this match was a gritty, intense encounter that furthered the Taker, Mankind DX infancy narrative. It set a perfect violent tone for the evening. Final thoughts. Historically, Canadian Stampede is frequently rated 9/10 or higher. It is the rare event where every single segment feels meaningful and high stakes. It remains the gold standard for what a shorter, focused pay-per-view can achieve when the company commits to a single, white-hot storyline. In the context of your Combos and Kayfabe project, how does this show change the way you look at crowd psychology? 17. Ground Zero, September 7, 1997, took place at the Richmond Coliseum and is viewed by historians as a setup show. Following the lightning-in-a-bottle success of Canadian Stampede, this event felt like the company was catching its breath, focusing on the long-term build toward the inaugural Bad Blood event and the return of the Hell in a Cell. Event overview. The show is often criticized for its confusing finishes and a lack of decisive outcomes. It was very much a narrative bridge, a classic TV-style PPV where nothing was truly resolved, and every major story was simply moved forward to the next bigger show. Key matches and reception. WWF Championship, Bret the Hitman Hart C versus the Patriot. This was the main event, and it is widely remembered as a disappointment. The Patriot, Del Wilkes, was a transparent USA-themed babyface designed solely to antagonize the anti-American Hart Foundation. The match was slow, predictable, and lacked the big fight feel of a main event, serving mostly as a mechanism to showcase the Hart Foundation's dominance. The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels. The match that ultimately saved the show from being a total wash. It was a chaotic, high-intensity brawl that ended in a massive ring-clearing, double disqualification. It wasn't the technical masterpiece they would later produce, but it succeeded in establishing the intense animosity between the two, leading to the creation of the Hell in a Cell match for the following month. The post-match brawl involving the entire locker room is an iconic snapshot of 1997 anarchy. The Headbangers versus the Hart Foundation, Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, versus the Legion of Doom versus Savio Vega and Miguel Perez, a four-way tag match for the vacant tag team championship. The win by the Headbangers is often cited as one of the most surprising title changes of the year. While not a technical classic, it was a fast-paced, entertaining bout that provided a much-needed shot of adrenaline to the show's mid-card. Brian Pillman versus Goldust, a bizarre character-heavy match with a stipulation where the loser would have to wear a dress. If Pillman lost, Marlena would become his personal assistant. It was purely an exercise in Attitude-era shock value, and is frequently criticized for being more about the soap opera antics than the actual wrestling. Final thoughts. Retrospective ratings for Ground Zero generally land in the 4/10 to 5/10 range. It is widely considered one of the weaker 1997 shows, a year otherwise defined by high-quality booking. It exists primarily to bridge the gap between SummerSlam and Bad Blood, and most of its value today is purely archival for those tracking the Michaels/Undertaker blood feud. As you document the Combos and Kayfabe project, how do you handle events like this? Bad Blood, October 5, 1997, is one of the most historically significant pay-per-views in WWF history. Held in St. Louis, Missouri, the event is defined by the debut of the Hell in a Cell structure, the introduction of Kane, and the tragic backdrop of Brian Pillman's sudden death earlier that same day. Event overview. The event is often cited as a one-match show, but that one match, The Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels, is widely considered one of the greatest bouts of the 1990s. The atmosphere was understandably somber due to the passing of Brian Pillman, a tragedy that Vince McMahon addressed at the beginning of the broadcast. Despite the heavy mood, the event delivered several moments that would shape the company's trajectory for years to come. Key matches and reception. Main event, Shawn Michaels vs. The Undertaker, Hell in a Cell. This is the definitive match of the event and arguably the greatest cage match ever produced. It was a masterpiece of storytelling and physical theater, featuring a legendary bump where Michaels fell from the side of the cell through the Spanish announce table. The match's climax, the debut of Kane, who tore the door off the hinges to deliver a tombstone piledriver to his brother The Undertaker, is a cornerstone moment of the Attitude Era. Owen Hart vs. Farouk, IC title tournament final. A significant match that saw Owen Hart capture the vacant Intercontinental Championship. The involvement of Stone Cold Steve Austin, who sat at ringside and interfered to help Owen win, provided a complex layer of narrative intrigue that kept the crowd engaged during a difficult evening. Bret Hart and the British Bulldog versus the Patriot and Vader, flag match. A solid, if somewhat long, tag team contest. It served to continue the intense Canada versus USA rivalry that dominated the 1997 landscape. It was a serviceable match, though it suffered slightly from being positioned before the emotional and technical peak of the main event. The Godwins versus the Headbangers, tag team titles. This was a title change that saw the Godwins capture the belts. It is generally remembered as a middling affair that struggled to find crowd heat, overshadowed by the tragic news of the day. Nation of Domination versus the Legion of Doom handicap match. A last-minute scramble to reorganize the card following Pillman's passing. It was a functional match that kept the Nation of Domination's momentum going, but lacked the polish of a standard pay-per-view attraction. Final thoughts. Historically, Bad Blood is a difficult show to grade. From a pure wrestling perspective, the Hell in a Cell main event is an easy 5/5 or higher, elevating the entire show. However, the emotional toll of the tragedy and the filler nature of the undercard lead most retrospectives to place it in the 6/10 to 7/10 range overall. 18. D-Generation X, December 7, 1997, held at the Springfield Civic Center in Springfield, Massachusetts, is remembered as the moment the company fully committed to the Attitude direction. This event signaled the official takeover of the main event scene by the D-Generation X faction, and solidified Shawn Michaels as the top heel in the promotion following the chaotic events of the previous month. Event overview. This event is largely viewed as a bridge between the classic era of Bret Hart, who had departed the company following the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series, and the full-throttle rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was a show defined by a shift in tone, cruder, more aggressive, and intensely focused on the rebel persona of DX. Key matches and reception. WWF Championship, Shawn Michaels, C. versus Ken Shamrock. This main event is often cited as a technical highlight of the show. While the storyline was centered on the arrogance of DX, the match itself was a very stiff, high-stakes encounter. It proved that Shamrock was more than a mid-card experiment and could carry a title match main event. The finish, involving a low blow and a disqualification, was a classic DX-style conclusion that successfully generated nuclear heat from the crowd. Stone Cold, Steve Austin vs. The Rock, Intercontinental Championship. This is the hidden gem of the show. Seeing these two future icons clash over the IC title is a historic moment. The match was intense, personal, and featured the classic Austin-Rock chemistry that would define the company for the next 5 years. Austin's victory cemented his status as the inevitable next champion, regardless of who stood in his way. The New Age Outlaws versus the Legion of Doom, Tag Team Championship. This match marked the massive breakout moment for the New Age Outlaws. Their victory and subsequent celebration helped launch them into the stratosphere of tag team stardom. It was a chaotic, crowd-pleasing bout that proved the Outlaws had the charisma to be one of the most over acts in the company. D'Lo Brown versus Jeff Jarrett. This served as a showcase for the revamped Nation of Domination, featuring a newly aggressive Jeff Jarrett. It was a solid, middle-of-the-card technical match that helped define the new stable dynamics of the late '97 roster. Butterbean versus Mark Merrow. A peculiar celebrity attraction match that remains one of the more polarizing moments of the event. While it was a short, gimmick-heavy affair, it leaned into the company's interest in integrating combat sports stars, even if it didn't do much for the wrestling purists. Final thoughts. Retrospectively, D-Generation X is usually rated in the 6/10 to 7/10 range. It isn't a perfect show, but it is a must-watch for the historical significance of the card. It serves as the official changing of the guard, where the characters who would carry the company through the peak of the Attitude Era were finally positioned at the forefront. In your Combos and Kayfabe community, how do you handle the transition period